October 16th to October 28th of 1962, the United States was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis. During this time, there were hundreds of bombers, missiles, and naval vessels from both the U.S. and the Soviets prepared to strike. The risk of accidents and misunderstandings was ever present. At the height of this confrontation, while President Kennedy and his advisors were preoccupied with Soviet missiles in Cuba, an Atlas long-range missile was test-launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base without the president's knowledge or approval. Other missiles at Vandenberg had already been placed on alert with nuclear warheads, and the Soviet Union could have viewed this Atlas launch as the beginning of an attack. On the same exact day as this incident, a U-2 spy plane flown by Major Charles Maltzby got lost and inadvertently strayed into Soviet airspace. The Soviets could have easily viewed these two incidents as provocation and chosen to retaliate. And in this case, we could have found ourselves in the middle of a thermonuclear war. Humanity could have been on a drastically different course based on an accident during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So I actually learned about this incident, and the book that really describes it is the author's Eric Schlosser. The book is Command and Control, which really goes over the history of a lot of potential Cold War accidents on the part of the United States. There's other sources for other places. So like I said, I learned about this when we did, I'll put it in air quotes, a prisoner exchange between the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center where I was there, and I was invited to spend a year at the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center to help them work on some problems. And they have a little schoolhouse. They call it the Schoolhouse for Unconventional Warfare, which sounds like science fiction, but it's actually CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. And in this class, we discussed how close we came to that. And it was something that the Air Force likes to look at for lessons learned, given that we've had some more incidents recently with flying bombers and parts around a few years ago. For curiosity's sake, if you go to San Diego and you go to the museum there where the aircraft carrier is, they also have a Russian submarine that participated in the missile crisis. Specifically a submarine that was armed with nuclear-tipped torpedoes, and the commander was told, fire on the Americans, and he said no. And so on his part, he prevented a big war. Just a personal thing, given that I was a nuclear weapons designer at Los Alamos for 8 years, when the course, unconventional weapons course, went over to a classified museum where they have the cutouts and the guts from 1945 through the latest weapons, I got to show the class, the guts and the highlights of the stuff. So
yeah. Before we go any further, I'm sure our audience is wondering, well, who exactly are we, and why are we talking about Soviet era and U.S. era weapons? Well, first of all, I'll go ahead and tell you, my name is Gabriel Hesch. I am an electrical engineer. I've worked with the I guess you call it the military-industrial complex for about 8 years, including my internships. I'm also a former science teacher. And the purpose of this podcast is to talk about events in history and our modern day and the future, from a scientist perspective. Alex, want to go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, but can you tell me what your thesis was in your master's?
Oh, definitely. For my master's degree in electrical engineering, I focused on genetic algorithms, which are very similar to evolutionary algorithms. I designed a program that automates the design of circuits using Darwinian evolution. Again, I should say genetic algorithms aren't technically evolutionary algorithms. They're a step back in complexity. But I created an original program that designed things by automation.
By somewhat biological automation.
Correct. So, that's the term that's used.
So my background is I have a Bachelor of Science in Physics, a Master of Science in Mathematics, which I got non-thesis, which means I did half of my hours in applied and half my hours in pure math. I think I wanted to be a pure mathematician. I eventually switched over to physics, and I got a PhD in particle physics from the University of Houston back in 2000. And that PhD in particle physics has parlayed into interesting job descriptions that I've had. I got to work on a trading floor, trading energy derivatives and weather derivatives and exotic derivatives. And one of the bases of all of that is stochastic processes, stochastic calculus, Ito calculus, which, guess what, was perfect for modeling neutrons inside nuclear weapons. So go figure, from finance to nuclear weapons. So I actually did a postdoc at Los Alamos at a facility called DART, Dual Axis Radiological Hydrodynamic Test, which is two giant football field-sized accelerators perpendicular to each other, and they release X-rays as a modern primary is being imploded. This is all part of the stockpile stewardship that we are doing by treaty to make sure that our weapons are working and the president has weapons that he knows are certified to work. So I got to experience accelerator physics at a pretty giant scale before I ended up in the historical X division. It's called Applied Physics Division, but historically it's been X division, where I worked as a physicist, a design physicist for nuclear weapons. Three things collided there: experimental physics, the best facilities coast to coast, versus theoretical physics. There are certain times when a nuclear weapon is a plasma like a star, well, then it's pure theory, versus code physics, the approximations that we have to make that our computers just can't handle. Anything else?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah, plenty. So we could go on and on about any one of those single topics. With this podcast, this came about because I worked with Alex at the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, and so often during our lunch breaks, we'd be in the break room just talking and talking. We'd have other folks come and sometimes join our conversation, but we'd go down these rabbit holes of black hole physics or of the fundamental limits of physics as proven by Kurt Gödel or any topic, you name it. We would talk about climate change, and we would talk about politics and the stability, if the stability of society can be modeled mathematically, which there's been some attempts, and we'll discuss those in future episodes about exactly how rigorous and how accepted they are. But we dove into all these rabbit holes of math and physics, and we figured, why not do a YouTube show or podcast, So
I think so. I think very much that. And I'll just remind what I was doing there specifically is helping America plan for the battlefield of the future, at the strategic scale from now through 2075. So I got to look at some really strange sci-fi stuff. What I had done before that, and I forgot to mention, was I worked at AFOTech, the Operational Test and Evaluation Center. They play war games at the operational level, so when we buy F-35s, we bring them to operational levels with the Navy, with our allies, and we fight it out to see if these new weapons are indeed delivering what was promised to the warfighter.
Wow. Yeah, no, obviously there's the stuff that we can talk about on a public show, which will be anything that's releasable to the public from the U.S. government, stuff you'd find in Scientific American or,
yeah, absolutely.
Other publications. But this stuff is, it's one of my favorite things in the world is to talk about, physics and math and engineering and where we're going. I want to mention it real quick. So I had said that I had mentioned that I was a science teacher for about 5 years before I went back to school for my master's in engineering. Talking about science is my favorite thing in the world. I've also said that a number of times. Alex and I have talked at length about how to get the public more scientifically literate. Here in America, I'd say that's high on the priority list of things that would make life better for everybody if everyone was more scientifically literate. Being a science teacher, that is one way to do it. You've got your 30 or so students in any class, plus or minus. Of course, there's some very, very crowded classes, but that's one way to make an impact. But the chance to do a podcast, this is exciting because now we literally can have an impact with anybody who chooses to watch this show. And that's really, really exciting to me. In fact, if you have any questions for Alex or myself about anything we've talked about, a couple of things. Our comment section is great. Please leave us comments. You can also send us an email at touringrabbitholespodcast@gmail.com. That's pretty exciting. What I also wanted to talk about is in the effort to get the public engaged in science, one thing that some folks have argued that we should do more of is science fiction. In addition to being a PhD particle physicist, Alex is also a science fiction author. Alex, can you tell us just a little sneak peek about your science fiction publications before we talk about what will be on this podcast?
Sure. So, back in 2004, I had a dream that I turned into a trilogy eventually. And I want to apologize to all previous readers. It wasn't until roughly 2017 that I hired a professional editor from New York City to help me, be transition from a physicist to a creative writer. So like I said, apologies to everyone before. But it's the idea was I looked at some Hitler Youth children in a academy for talented, kids that are talented in science and mathematics. And I followed their lives through World War II. One of them, she ends up being a nuclear weapons designer in Russia. The other one being a rocket engineer German through the Cold War. We take him, and he has his life here in the United States. And it's following, it's always, I'm always outlining very lightly the historical, technological, and scientific things that happened that enabled the Cold War to proceed as it did, the World War II as it did, and onward and onward. Eventually, I get them back together when they're I think, nonagenarians. And that's roughly our time. And they begin to look at our time and compare it to what was going on in the 1930s in Europe. And lo and behold, there are a lot of parallels between what's going on today in our country and other countries and what was happening back then. And then I take them out into the future, way out into the future, the first Mars landing, teleportation, how to upload your brain without actually dying. And in the history part, the first part of the trilogy is solid history. The second part continues to be history until I get past this 2020. Mm-hmm. Strong science fiction all the way through. I did the best I could to be plausible.
Let me ask you, so for our audience who might be interested in reading it, where can they get a copy of your books?
I believe they are on Amazon.com under my name, Alex Alanis. If you type Alex Alanis Earth or Mars or Universe, because those are the three books, you'll find them there. I think they're on there as Kindles for 99 cents, and because I'm a new author, and hard prints as well. Or they're available. I have the PDFs if you just ping me.
Nice, yeah. So if you just want to just ping Alex, then he'll send you the PDFs, which is pretty exciting. We're going to talk more about your science fiction books and about the historical parts of them, as well as the sci-fi parts of them here in a bit. I want to take a minute here and talk more about what's going to be on this podcast. This podcast is especially, and that comes from my inspirations as well as Alex's inspirations. And what's kind of cool is there's some areas where they overlap a little bit. So I've already mentioned that I'm an electrical engineer and also a former science teacher. My experience as a science teacher gave me a breadth of interest in all fields, not only math and physics, but also biology and chemistry and bioengineering and just about anything. I'm a huge reader of popular science. I just can't get enough of that. One area that interests me especially is brain science. I say brain science, but really I'm talking about medicine, how our brain works. In my family, there are a few people who have certain conditions that have gotten me very interested in the interworkings of the brain. For example, bipolar disorder, also schizoaffective disorder, as well as schizophrenia. I'm very, very interested in these things and like how is the brain of somebody with any of these things different from somebody who does not have them? What's the function of it? How are they treated? What have we learned about that over the years? So that field really, really interests me. Myself, I actually have a speech impediment, if you can't tell already. You know what? I'm not going to edit my stutters out because I'm a stutterer. That means that occasionally when I'm talking, I get stuck on a word and I can't say it. Just like Porky Pig. He's the cartoon character who made stuttering acceptable and famous and very, very cool. Now, I don't do it a whole lot, but there's times that I do it. And it's definitely noticeable. And it makes me think, what's the physiology behind that? Why is it that suddenly I'll be talking and then I'll just be stammering? I myself don't have a solid answer. I've asked a few different people and I've gotten a rather technical answer, but I don't have something that I'm prepared to address right here. But still, that's a very fascinating topic. So brain science will be a huge part of what we talk about, at least what I bring to the table in this podcast, and we will spend a lot of time on mental illness as well, just what we understand about it, and also how it's treated.
I think it's very interesting and very topical that you brought that up about stuttering, because Vice President Biden brought that up, that he was a stutterer and what he's done, what the struggles he had to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, it's very interesting.
It's cool. I've had people ask me about it, and also, first of all, I appreciate our audience because I know that we kind of go from topic to topic. We just went from Alex's sci-fi and his background in, in the nuclear weapons to me and stuttering. Well, this is just supposed to be like a sampler episode to kind of introduce you to what will be on our first series of shows. So bear with us on that aspect.
It's exactly that. It's a sampler program that we're going to be a broad spectrum show about things that affect society, things at the far edge of science, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say with my brothers, they talk to me a lot about my stuttering because they do not stutter. And they've asked me if I can feel it coming. It's so interesting. I absolutely can. I can't even explain it, but I used to be a server. And as soon as, there's something in me where I'm aware that I'm about to stutter, kind of like an inevitable car accident. You know what I mean? And I don't know. I'd love to share this experience with others. If any of our viewers stutter, I'd love to hear from you and hear what your experience is like as well. It's frustrating. I will very oftentimes avoid certain words because I know it's coming. Sort of like you're about to hit a pothole or something like that. So, anyways, this episode is not about stuttering. So I just wanted to put that out there in case any of our listeners especially want to comment. Even privately, if you want to email us at touringrabbitholespodcast@gmail.com, that would be awesome. So yes, brain science will be huge. Now, I mention brain science because that overlaps with another area. I'll say that again. I mention brain science because that overlaps with another area that is especially interesting for both Alex and myself, and that is artificial neural networks and machine learning. Alex, want to tell us a little bit about your interest in that area?
I have gotten very interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence and cyber warfare. In my two jobs ago, I helped the Air Force in its formulation of cyber ranges between 15-year-old kids, the proverbial fat guy in your mother's basement, to nation-state cyber warfare. So suffice to say that I those are the things that have interested me in artificial intelligence and machine learning, to the point where, and I currently serve the Air Force as a senior physicist / technical advisor. These things have interested me to the point in that the Air Force, like all the other services, have Air Command Staff College, Air War College as you progress in your career. And I am going to try, I've done it for Air Command Staff College, written papers on the fact that it is time now to begin creating formal doctrine for cyber warfare between nation states. And this goes back to the 1920s, right after World War I. How do we use air power, this new invention? And an Italian Duhat, Billy Mitchell here in America, and others began to formulate air power doctrine. It was old-fashioned, it was wrong, but it was the beginning. It was the beginning. And what Eisenhower said is that a plan is worthless, but the process of planning is invaluable. Well, that's where I'm trying to get to, is go to our learning facilities, our Air War colleges, our Air Command Staff colleges, and begin that writing of doctrine. And I wrote a white paper on that, which is available, I think.
Yes, this is
openly available.
I'm really excited to share this, actually. So here we are, obviously, we've got a physicist and we've got an electrical engineer, and we podcast, and of course you're pretty much, you're taking our word for it so far. Now, I want to add that if you go to the link in our video description, you will find that we have literature. We have papers that Alex has written. Mostly, I have a few that are being written, but they're not available yet. But you will see links to literature that Alex has written that has all the citations. It's got explanations, it's got equations and diagrams and all kinds of stuff. So this podcast isn't only us talking about things, we actually have the citations to back them up. And I think that's really exciting for those of you who want to really deep dive into something. So Alex just mentioned, for example, that he, thinks it'd be a great idea for us to have official doctrine on machine learning and how it's used by
between nation states.
Yeah.
Say, for instance, a democracy. In democracies we have open, free communication. We assume that we can say what we want. In this age of Twitter and Facebook and other social media, this is the perfect age for nefarious forces in other countries, say communist nations or corrupt mafia-like nations, to use machine learning and AI to precipitate, effects on us. And I'm not sure if the Russians were trying this from a doctrinaire point of view, But there are cases that are reported in the Senate report, on the intelligence report, that Russian activities on Twitter and Facebook got people to show up and assemble en masse in America, throughout
Isn't
the
that
2016
crazy?
election.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, it's high time we formalize this.
Yeah, this is absolutely. So that's actually in the reports from the FBI. We should actually include a link to all the above. But we will have an episode all about that, and the episode will be about catastrophe theory broadly speaking, but specifically, it'll be about the need for doctrine for machine learning and artificial intelligence as it's used in social media by nation states. You can read the paper right now. Check the links in the. And I'm sorry, what's the name of the paper? It's kind of a long name.
I always forget about it, but if you get to the folder, you can get access to it. It's Machiavellian Doctrine for Nation-State Warfare.
I'll bet I could find it.
You can find it. Meanwhile, while you're looking for that,
okay.
One of the topics we will be discussing related to that is the mathematics of catastrophe theory. And catastrophe theory, in the simplest form, is if you keep piling sand one grain at a time, eventually you're going to have an avalanche. You keep doing that, you have avalanches that are small, medium, large. The same thing can be said for things like the Arab Spring, which was precipitated by a single man trying to feed his children, and the police took away what he was peddling, and so he self-immolated. He burned himself in front of the police station, I believe. Within weeks to months to a year, multiple Arab state countries toppled their dictatorships. That would be a catastrophic, in a mathematical sense, change. The people were prepped for that. Very much like, I believe now, the Black Lives Matter movement today, I think, was precipitated by enough stuff happening in the media that now it seems that the whole nation is gripped by this. And I hear stories of professional football teams possibly changing their names. That is a catastrophe.
Not in the bad sense, a catastrophe in a mathematical sense.
In a mathematical sense. And, they've been occurring naturally. The Russian Revolution was natural. They've been occurring naturally, but now in our state of ones and zeros, the cloud, can they be hacked is the question that we try to get into.
Yes. So I have the paper in front of me. And in fact, if you go to the link, in the video description, it's called Doctrine for and a Path to Warfare by Artificial Intelligence. And it was published on the 23rd of November, 2018. So check it out. It's an intense paper. It's really, really good. So yeah, we've got quite a bit here that we'll be talking about. Now, let's talk about some of the other things that will be on this podcast. We had mentioned that I'm going to do a lot of brain science, especially with mental illnesses. And again, I'm looking at it from a scientific perspective. We will include stories because they are helpful for illustrating, but we're going to look specifically on talking about the mechanics of mental illnesses. We'll be talking about catastrophe theory. I think Alex, you have writings on black holes. You did an entire sort of a reflection on the PBS Space-Time series on black holes. Isn't that right?
Yes, I actually have lots of papers. I have a paper that takes you step by step from 1834 on how the various formulations of mechanics became the various formulations of quantum mechanics, the wave mechanics, the matrix mechanics, et cetera. So it's step by step. If you're studying physics or getting a master's or PhD, you won't have a question because every step has been filled. In addition, there's that tangential paper that we have. One of the ways we found we can unify gravity with particle physics is called holography, where the boundary has one less dimension than the interior boundary, than the interior bulk, And here you can have curved space-time on the edge. You have one less dimension. It's flat. You can have your quantum fields. I think I might have butchered that on holography, but the idea is that we can unify gravity and particle physics that way. Unfortunately, the dimensions are 5 and 4. For the bulk and the boundary, we need to go 4 and 3. So we haven't figured out how to do that yet.
Wow. That's actually really exciting. So again, in Alex's literature, and I will put links in the description, you have papers that essentially you've gone through graduate level physics textbooks that were really laborious. They were very, very difficult. And you've written some papers to help explain them, for somebody else so they don't necessarily have to go through the same methods that you went through with these
So my favorite one is the fact that we can formulate theories with internal symmetries and theories that are geometrical, internal symmetries being particle physics standard model and geometric being general relativity. We can codify both of them within something called fiber bundle theory. The mathematicians proceeded this way, the physicists proceeded that way, and eventually they figured out they were doing the same thing. That codification most people with the PhD in math or PhD in physics won't hear of it. You have to be lucky enough to go to the right school with the right thesis advisor. I'm trying to make it democratic. Here it is, step by step, no mystery. No, you don't have to fight.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, hopefully this sampler episode will get you quite excited about this podcast and you'll join us. I think the very next topic that we'll be talking about, if you guys want to hang tight, is actually Alex's science fiction books.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I was just pointing.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. So just a little preview here. If you watch our next episode, Alex, will you tell us a little bit about some of the science fiction elements that are introduced in your science fiction series? I'm talking specifically about the technologies.
So in book 2, I take these ancient Germans that have been around, and one of them, he gets too old, so I put him on ice. The similar to what's going on in Arizona, where people are being frozen in the hopes that they can be awoken in the future. And the other one, she's a billionaire, I began to experiment with the telomeric sciences that people are playing with today, that she has access to stuff that most people don't, and how she might become younger and younger as the decades go by. And I tried very hard to stick with the modern science, the CRISPR technologies, the telomeric length increasing. For the male character, he's the love interest in it. He gets woken up roughly in 2050. And I worked years to think, how does it feel to be awoken from a state of having been frozen? I cheat a little bit because I put a nanobot network in his brain before he's frozen so they can monitor his thoughts, even though they're happening a month at a time versus seconds at a time.
Yeah.
And so I explore that in as great a detail as I can. They eventually upload. Most of the upload technologies that are popular today, I believe that you die and a copy comes on that thinks it's you, but you're dead. So I figured, using a book that came out in the 1990s by Eric Drexler, Nanotechnology, that gets into the weeds of the machinery of biology, the proteins that are machines, how we might avoid that. And the answer I came up with is, why don't we make nanobots that are biological and silicon-based that float around your brain, sit around by your neurons, go, okay, that neuron's doing this when it's easy, input, output. As your neurons die, they replace. And eventually, maybe over several years or a decade, you have a silicon brain. Now what happens? Can you upload from there to the internets?
That is a deep question. So I want to talk a bit about that here. There is this old Japanese philosophical question involving ships. And if you have a ship, and if you replace one by one every single board on that ship, but you only do it one at a time, by the time you have replaced every single board that was on the original ship, do you have the original ship or not?
It's essentially that. This is a graceful way to have continuity. As your brain goes from 0% silicon neurochip to 1%, 5%, you never feel that transition. Yeah. You're not cognizant of it.
What's the difference then between a cell replacing itself and a cell being replaced by a synthetic cell?
The fact that cells replacing themselves eventually run out, right? Through the telomere shrinks to zero and it dies.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So, alrighty, so we've got that and a whole lot more. In fact, we may do for our next episode a deep dive intro into Alex's sci-fi books, and we'll talk about the historical elements of them, and we'll also talk about the science fiction elements. And of course, you're welcome to read them yourself, as they are available on Amazon Kindle, as well as they're available in hard copies or a PDF version. If you just want to email Alex, he'll send them directly to you, no charge.
Exactly.
No charge. How do you like that? Well, thank you so much for joining us on this very, very first episode of Touring Rabbit Holes. I want to, before we end, I've already given you our email, but I'll say it again. It is touringrabbitholespodcast@gmail.com. Right now, the best way to help us to get the word out about this show is to share it with your friends. Also, liking and subscribing is hugely appreciated. Leave a review. We'd love that. And please feel free to interact with us. If you send us a comment on the video or an email or a private message, either myself or Alex will get right back to you. And again, there's a whole lot that will be happening in this podcast. It'll be a cross-section between science, it'll be brain science, it'll be the military industrialized complex, it'll be mathematical models of nation states, it'll be any science or math topic that interests us that we feel that we are at least qualified in some way to talk about. We'll have a whole lot of guests on the show as well. And of course, we'll delve into science fiction as well. So thank you very much. Alex, do you have anything else to add to this one?
No, thank you very much. I'm so glad I met you back at the Nuclear Weapons Center. And like I said, thank you.
Thank you. And we are thrilled to share our passion with you guys. So with that, we will see you next time. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, back up, rewind real quick. I didn't mean to say I'll see you next time. We have set up a Patreon account with the specific intention of employing locals in the creative scene. Back when I was a teacher, I really was, I guess I'll use the word enchanted, by how awesome creative individuals are and creative, that part of humanity. It's not just science and math, but art and music and poetry. I had the privilege as a teacher of being the chairperson of the talent show. And the reason why I bring this up is, if we're doing a show here and the show is about mathematics and science and also humanity as well, I would love to have creative people help us to get the message across. So to that end, we have a Patreon account. I would love to hire a full-time intern who can help us with video editing, but also creating fabulous graphics and other visuals. Perhaps they'll even do a dramatic musical score or things like that, or we'll just give them the entire Adobe suite and say, be creative, have at it, and we'll see where it goes. But it's very much... I'm very much inspired to do that. I want to employ creative people as part of this company and this process. At least that's what the way I currently see it. So we currently have a $5 tier and a $10 tier. I'm going to add a $1 tier as well as a $2 tier because every single bit helps, and we greatly appreciate that. I think the price to gainfully employ an intern, if it were full time. Gosh, I don't want to really set a limit on that. It'd be wonderful to, employ somebody full-time for a year. So in a year's time, what is that? At least $35,000, something like that.
That'd be probably...
Aim high, right? Aim high. Anyways, that's our goal. I'd like to employ people. So for your consideration, please consider being a patron. And if you'll find our Patreon page at patreon.com/touringrabbitholes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.